We got about a week to launch, and beyond Legends ZA having the longest development of any Pokemon game in the last decade, a director that I can personally vouch for as some of the best new blood at Game Freak, and so many hopes and dreams of mine for the games being answered in a region that I now know the entire development history of, the series has never been in a better spot than right at this moment. And let me show you why. As is the case for all the main series Pokemon, Game Freak's zigzagging development for Legends ZA began after Legends Arceus was out the gate with an official statement that it began the fine-tuning phase in January, putting this game just shy of black and white with nearly 4 years of active development, the second longest of any in the series. The announcement of a DLC project with an entirely new director during that extra time doesn't even worry me, because we know that Pokemon games create additional content after their production ends, based on the knowledge that they couldn't have existed when the original games were made, or literally have publicized logs of the game's development history, like this is par for the course. On the rare occasion we know content was left on the table for a future game, it turned out to be the most radical third version departure in the series and more than the sum of its parts. And in the last video I talked about how hard it is to maintain any sort of schedule with all these moving parts of the franchise, a sentiment echoed by series director Omori himself. This is a top ZA setting in stone the trend of another pillar of the series that properly delegates actual single player experiences into their own lane, as opposed to trying to exist with game design that has consistently compromised those single player experiences. So going toe to toe with one of the most feature complete, polished entries in the series in terms of time taken is a real triumph next to the last couple of games in that middle in 3 years by comparison. The honest-to-god repugnant visuals and horrendous frame rate of the last games was something I outlined super early on, and thankfully ZA is just night and day in all the areas we can compare so far. Yeah, Game Freak's engine will always hit a game with the ugly stick, things being wheelie lit when they probably shouldn't, or gross LOD for things in the distance. But the design of Lumiose as a condensed metropolis mitigates the blandscapes we got in Paldea for the most part. Broken Charizard Flame or Sableye Gem transparency notwithstanding, the character lighting here is so soft compared to the last attempt, even if the art style is fairly similar overall. Last time I praised Scarlet and Violet's attempt at making the Pokemon blend better with their environment than Sword and Shield's balloon animals, so this softer harmony feels like an in-between of nearly all of the Switch games in the best way possible. They're even updating models to match the new ones introduced in that game. I feel bad bullying SV because it had successes, particularly in narrative, snappy writing, especially audio, but ultimately the design of an open world where all of the gameplay was segmented away from that open world just didn't sit right. Worst of all, the generic wild battle system that lacked the dynamism of what came prior. Until the second round of DLC with those Blueberry quests, each aspect of the gameplay loop felt so distant from each other. Like the Terror Raids seemed to have such a huge focus, but the dens themselves are a little more than a waypoint marker and a loading screen in the open world, which makes the entire thematic crescendo of the final fight be related to a part of the game you're actively disincentivized from playing due to those barriers, only exacerbated by the fact that a paid online subscription is the way they want you to experience this mechanic for literally years worth of events. Meanwhile, ZA coming out the gate with a fast catch-in from Legends Arceus reassures me that there is a rewarding gameplay loop there. That game's revamp of the way you interact with Pokemon, every wild encounter and berry tree and breakable rock hand place to give you that just one more feeling, breadcrumbing the player around an area was the evolution of this series going forward. Better than the Pokemon pacing about in a sandbox just waiting to give you a 10-second loading screen where they do their cry and then you send out your guy and then you click the Pokeball button. God, I'm so over the moon to see this return. Granted, I'm a little concerned about how ZA is going to contextualize catching hundreds of Pokemon as a fun thing to do, given that you're no longer filling out the original Pokedex like in Legends Arceus. But the staff have already converted something unique to that game for the modern day, so I'm more than confident that this updated look at Kalos knows what it's doing. A feeling further heightened by the games. If one Legends revolutionized the series' capture mechanics, and this one seems to want to do so for trainer battles. I'll get into why this happened later on, but for the most part we've transitioned from turn-based battles into a full action RPG. It's gotta be noted that ZA compromising on the series' existing battles is totally fine because A, we already got SV and now Champion, so that turn-based fix, and B, because there's more to the series than that to consider. Like, I saw a lot of people bitching about the size of Pokemon in this game, so I did a test myself with the smallest possible Onix and Arceus versus what we got here. Normally, even slightly neuter in the scale of what is supposed to be an immersive creature capture game with a bunch of guys is something we should be against, but I'm totally fine to sacrifice that aspect of the game design since Pokemon now move about in battle and their actual size and hurt box matters. Like, I don't want to be punished for choosing to use big body Onix more than I already am for using Onix in a Pokemon game, but more than that, it opens the door for more niche team building opportunities. Sword and Shield's toy box feeling in the wild areas were exacerbated because every Pokemon had to move at a set speed. The 10-second wait time for a fight to start would be so much more agonizing if everything could run you down at 200 miles an hour. But here, the size and speed of a Pokemon outside of its stats in combat are an actual feature that plays ball with the game's mechanics. mechanics? How is this going to factor into water combat on more residential areas, parks, narrow alleyways, the raid battles, and so on? It feels like the natural evolution from Let's Go to Arceus to ZA was the idea of making the Pokemon themselves feel more than just 4 moves, a type, and some nebulous stat points. Now you can sneak up on trainers, get a backstrike like an Arceus, so what if the Pokemon that are bigger and louder end up being the most ineffective to lead with for the purpose of stealth? Isn't that more interesting than the 20th Pokemon game in a row when you can lead with your best type in almost every instance? Building a team around archetypical traits of each Pokemon with a variety of moves, and seeing it as glorified rock, paper, scissors yet again. Legends Arceus also had different player archetypes with the bait, stealth, or stun mechanics allowing you to approach situations differently. And ZA is going to bring that forward through your choice in team building, which feels like the culmination of what this series is about. And while in Arceus it was solid, I can't help but feel like it was something you had to go out of your way to achieve, with the optimal play being fastballs or beating the brains out of whatever poor guy is going to get heavy balled. Now, Pokemon are no longer dangerous wild animals that you gotta sneak around, so it only made sense to bring that idea forward under a trainer battle context. Also, it's just Battle City, it's just fucking Battle City as a Pokemon game. God, this really does feel like an apology for SV, all thanks to the way the battles now operate. A heightened focus in this area means that a full roster of uniquely designed trainer classes are so back. Each move now has specific hold animations for the Pokemon like Legends Arceus did that reflect their actual length, though the biggest triumph is that our party of Pokemon finally matter again. Scarlet and Violet is ultimately a game about the illusion of choice within an open world setting. Sure, there's 400 guys to collect in Paldea, but only a few dozen mandatory battles throughout the game to actually use them. You flat out are not required to work with the guys in your party as much as any past entry in the series, which has a dramatic effect on level design and the team you choose to use. There's no contests or any real extracurricular activity, so why would these choices matter at all? Except what, raids where you use one Pokemon spec for a specific type as you bound towards the loading screen on the map? Arceus had even less trainer battles, but the clear focus was on sniping wild Pokemon and being breadcrumbed around each area in that way. The scope was never really about your party of guys to begin with, and like I said with ZA, I'm fine to have a game that compromises on existing aspects of the series, so long as what replaces it is substantive. Scarlet and Violet had nothing in place of that. And I'm gonna be honest, seeking out the trainers in a whole area for like the TM for Aerial Ace or some shit is not the most appealing proposition. Either way, in spite of a clear split between battling and catching, the lines are blurred enough to make ZA's gameplay loop closer to the dream ideal Pokemon game I've always had in mind. One half being laser focused on the lifeblood of the series, raising your guys in the most immersive, seamless way it's ever been, and the other is about using every aspect of those Pokemon choices when nighttime rolls around. Not just the types or stats or the moves, in a more narrative-driven, contextually relevant half of the game which drills down into the core principle of the series. The bond between player and Pokemon right down to the way your movement affects them, being the perfect time to bring Mega Evolution back into the fold. Not as something you tap the bottom screen on to snap the difficulty in two, but as a legitimate transformation of this Pokemon and all the benefits and risks that come with that. And it's about time we talked about the guy responsible. God, I really thought Iwao would come back as the director of the next Legends project. I'd sang his praises ever since Ultra Sun and Moon, but Arceus really showed that his sweeping vision for the series with a more experimental, fresh approach was what it desperately needed after what was practically a 2003 Pokemon game in a console. And also, that game. But earlier this year, I spotted that Famitsu revealed none other than Haruka Tochigi as this game's director. And holy shit, I backflipped in front of my monitor the moment I saw. I've known of and interacted with Tochigi for years, keeping up with his work ever since the character designs for Little Town Hero. But his history in the industry goes way back to graduating art school partway through the late 2000s and rising up through the ranks as a map designer at level 5, as well as an environment artist in the White Knight Chronicles series, which if you've ever played those games shouldn't really be much of a surprise. Joining Game Freak in 2013, he was immediately put as the 3D map graphics lead for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And while Gen 3's look is okay, the kind of vomit green palette of Ruby and Sapphire's overworld, regardless of which screen you're playing on, never really demonstrated the rich, warm, Kyushu-inspired vibes as well as its remakes did. Everything pops in a way that makes it feel clearly distinct from X and Y's more tempered approach to atmosphere when they could have just reused it all and nobody would have really noticed. Little Town Hero is interesting as a super budget title that was unfairly maligned by dipshits who thought it took all of Sword and Shield's development when it was like 10 people, but what really alerted me to his presence in the series was as the CG director of Legends Arceus. And man, I should have seen this coming. He was the damn near top credit on that game, and god does it show. The best looking cutscenes in the 3DS were mostly elevated by good storyboarding, while some music plays over it that barely feels like it was written for that scene. Some characters barely emote, some Pokemon animations barely feel purposeful. Sword and Shield were even worse. The camera in those games during these scenes are almost hard cut to hard cut, and there's no serious attempt at anything besides animating the characters within an environment. Such little effects work, you get the idea. Then Legends Arceus comes around, the framing just gets leagues better. How you only get glimpses of Cleavor before he's silhouetted against the sun and drops down. The way Arcanine walks through the damn lava. This fucking scene slowly revealing how huge Avalugg is, better than any actual Titan Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet. How the origin Pokemon during their reveal mimic that pose you've seen Arceus do for so many years as the player is just so insignificant in the corner. The reveal of Giratina with how its wing comes out from behind Volo like it's his before you even know what's happening. Everything about the way this director tells style's all you need to know. Like, these guys are visually on the same wavelength. It's all so much better than a fucking Pokemon game has any right to be, and this guy's responsible for directing every single one. Every interaction I've had with, a post I've seen from Tochigi has consistently demonstrated how hard of a worker this guy is, chipping away at his own little low-poly indie Mega Man Legends inspired game while directing the next big Pokemon release, and his long-term affinity for Xenoblade is a clear inspiration for ZA's battle system. As much as I trust the old guard that's been with the series for a minute, having new blood lead the way with clear influence from some of the most critically acclaimed games in the genre has just gotta be the way to go. Makes it even funnier seeing all the claims that Palworld made them go in a more ARPG direction when Tochigi wears those inspirations so heavily on his sleeve. And also, why would a game in 2024 have such a heavy influence on the entire gameplay direction of a project that started 2 years prior to its launch? Are you guys for real? There's also an interview that always stuck out to me where Haruka mentions a new concept and visual studio established in 2022. He words it like a designer's version of your typical R&D department with a focus on nailing design for next generation systems. The highlight here is that Haruka himself openly acknowledges that the series is a long way to go, particularly when it comes to visuals, technology, and experimentation. And yet again, does that feel like the first genuine acknowledgement of what people have been talking about for so many years? He goes on to discuss Game Freak's drive to constantly hire fresh staff, and the people who join the company without any desire to experiment with or change Pokemon will be lost in Game Freak's culture. And man, this all feels like such a watershed moment for him in the series at large, with ZA starting development right around this time period. Further emphasized from that quote by Haruka that we translated stating ZA ended its final polishing stage at the end of last year. Like, we have a year's worth of extra quality assurance that past games wouldn't have been granted. Something especially important with the jump to a console that actually feels like it's gonna function at a stable. Cool that Nintendo is actually making a console with features besides it's portable though. But brass tacks, Game Freak has struggled with optimization ever since the jump to consoles. Yeah, the 3DS games lagged in exceptional situations, but there weren't whole areas or modes or entire maps that made a game shit bricks. And I don't really care if this doesn't affect your personal enjoyment, but this is unacceptable. Get all that tinfoil out of the pool, man. Switch 2 waving its magic wand and giving us the first full buttery smooth 60 FPS Pokemon game since what, Pokemon Emerald after 20 years is something I never thought I'd see. But why do I have to pay extra for a game to run well but not Scarlet and Violet, which gets a free update? Whatever, basically a Switch 2 game at this point costs $1 million anyway, and even on the Switch 2 they need to update the game logic to match the system specs. Because Interactable should not pop in like that, but it does make that interview about prepping for new systems feel so fascinating in hindsight. One thing the 3D Pokemon has struggled with pretty consistently are clear obvious transitionary periods in game design due to the role and development periods, where things are clearly tested in one game then fully implemented a couple of entries later. Overworld Pokemon hybrid with Overworld Pokemon then full implementation of individual handpicked placement for encounters. Or even something like grid-based movement, semi-grid based, and then eternal full analog. ZA's heavy lifting where that's concerned is abundantly less obvious because the real change you care about is on the purposeful gameplay front. And less the incidental technical strides now that it's playable on what's effectively a PS4.5, but I can't help feel like a return to Kalos is inevitably a bit stifled due to the lack of a bottom screen on what is a very anti-Nintendo move to make the last thing but better. While I am glad we have a Pokemon game that runs now, making an entry focus on the harmony between people and Pokemon is a sequel to games where some of their biggest strengths and absolutely their most prominent features that only really worked because of that system integration when I probably can't like pet them, feels a little weird, especially given that so many of said features were hurried along in the final phases of development. Though I will endlessly fillet whichever Game Freak dev puts mouse control in the game for moving Pokemon in the PC box easiest $10 of my life. Granted, it also goes both ways. I liked Alpha Pokemon and Arceus because they're a way to contextualize bosses that match the kinetic gameplay introduced in that game whilst also working off the player's curiosity to explore that world. Past games delegated their strong fights to boss characters that often resided in a specific location or pockets within the game's narrative. But now the mere concept of exploration and interaction with the environment is that storytelling. Like, you can tell a lot about a person just by knowing which alpha they encountered first by path and left, right, or not at all. And the player's ability to define that narrative themselves is a step above every single person just one-shotting Byron's entire team with Surf. Likewise, I'm happy to see them return in ZA, but these are literally just alpha Pokemon again. Plucked from a game set 200 years ago where they were contextually relevant. Now wandering around a populated city with an existing enraged Pokemon problem that acutely ties into the game's main gimmick, action-oriented style of gameplay, and a returning character from XY itself. Not a huge deal, but the concept of Legends core mechanics being crowbarred in from something that had such an explicit purpose to be there feels so anti-Legends. That could have been and was done with a lot more finesse, especially if the game doesn't end up doing anything new with the idea that Arceus did. You know, since we only had one of these to go off of so far, I was also concerned that Legends might have been an old-timey aesthetic thing and less an experimental branch of the main series for Game Freak to drill down on the core essence of Pokemon. But with this game set after XY, I'm super glad to see that that just isn't the case. With a sequel like this, you can do a lot with expanding on characters like AZ, Emma, and God knows who else from X and Y's tenuously relevant story. You know, the one that made a point to exonerate Lysander in the eyes of your rival character after they witnessed those events personally. Especially now we have 2 known terrorists running around. Considering that we know everything about that game's development top to bottom, the Southern Kalos buzzword has also been thrown around. And all this is to say, I'm thankful they just didn't release a literal Pokémon Z to appeal to people that wanted more out of X and Y in that way. And I'm a little afraid that's what ZA might just be for some people. If only because if you actually look at the developer documents, not whatever some deeply unserious leak account put on your Twitter feed, you'll see that Southern Kalos was in no uncertain terms never meant to appear in X and Y, and instead an upper version that just didn't see the light of day, with only a tentative number of areas and vague location names remaining. And while they're surely pulling stuff out of the original Z bag for this one, I'm glad it's not a jacked 3DS game with a snake on the cover made by the Pokemon Works up whatever. Yeah, I sure hope it does. This also goes for people that wanted a Legends game about the Kalos War up whatever. Like, Arceus didn't waste time belaboring Giratina's banishment or the creation of the universe or anything we already knew. It instead told a fresh story that facilitated its modern approach to the series gameplay. We wouldn't have the scrappy, Pokemon dodging, fast-paced, seek out every Pokemon catch-a-thon we would have got if Game Freak's goal was to check boxes made by guys in their mid-20s. And it's why I'm so excited that this game is set in a single city and how they're going to challenge themselves in that new environment in the same way PLA did with Hisui. You can already see the treasure trove of new Pokemon-specific animations, and I can't wait to see how this game approaches such a living, breathing world. If anything, the increased focus on trainer battles feels like a response to the last Legends title. It's like it's being purposefully iterative while also being like PLA and that there's going to be no other game in the series like it. People will pit these two against each other even if they're just as good, and that fucking rules. Kalos itself also wasn't unfinished in the way a lot of people say in hindsight. Pokemon fans have always had a strange fascination with the term post-game, and I feel like it's just a bit of a misdirect where X and Y was concerned. Like, it had a post-game, but it was short and sweet and actually pretty solid. The problem is that it was tricky to even activate, and for the first time in the series, we had a game that left a lot of shit open for future entry that never came. But in a world where earlier games had so much stuff in them and later ones were literally missing half the Pokemon or huge plots of land where gyms were replaced in the final hour, I commend Game Freak for taking the idea of a Pokemon Z in a new direction. Can we actually talk about Zygarde, by the way? The guy is just beyond reproach as a design. A sleek black and green color scheme, individual forms that evoke a cuteness, ferocity, mystery, or overwhelming strength. The dog with the glowing butthole is the best one, by the way, and I can only dream that ZA uses its hexagonal pattern as part of the UI design, which is already a step up from Arceus. Like, every single image has so much life. Shit, the promotion for this game has been awesome. ZA's renders are leagues ahead of anything for the main series prior. The new Pokemon reveals are unique and charming versus being shot out in a generic gameplay trailer. Gone are the days of Sun and Moon where damn near the entire plot and roster were outlined before release. And even the Zygarde cells, they exist. They're tangible in the world. There's gonna be like a million of them. God, it's gonna be so fun to move around and collect and explore things throughout this city. Okay, well... So I've established my confidence in ZA seeming to hit on 2 of the 3 core pillars of Pokemon with regards to capture and battle. But the third very real concern is something that the series has never really succeeded with in 3D. And that's about creating a world with a focus on interesting traversal, puzzle design, and most importantly... X and Y to Sword and Shield are kind of to blame for this because none of them really did anything to prepare the series with 3D map design besides the illusion of a third dimension. You could put almost every area in those games in damn near tile-based 2D and very little would be lost. But that's okay, right? All Pokemon needed to be during the jump to 3D was what it was in 2D. Except that isn't true because when you put a Pokemon character into an actual 3D environment designed like a 3D environment, which was going to happen at some point, it all falls apart. Like, answer me this, how do you do traditional random encounters in that 3D setting? Do you just say fuck it and put them in the overworld? If so, where do they spawn? Are there random encounters alongside the overworld encounters? Are they handpicked or truly random? Is there grass, no grass? How do they appear, disappear, scale, move? Sword and Shield did not know the answer to any of these questions and tried everything anyway. Now extrapolate that issue to a million other aspects of the game design with a fully rotatable camera. What's with the rampant Gen 8 revisionism, by the way? Why are hallways with static cameras that show you a single good-looking picture of an area better looking than something with full camera control? I don't know, guys. Let's be glad Sword and Shield didn't have any of those. I harp on a lot about the toy box feeling in 3D Pokemon games, because what was acceptable as a ledge you can't get past with a static camera in Sun and Moon is all of a sudden very weird and very not acceptable in the wild area where I should not bonk on this thing, clearly scaled for my character to climb up. But I can't unless I'm, 2 feet to the side. All of these areas lack verticality and are really just a vague suggestion of where the invisible walls are. Have you ever tried to follow where Articuno is supposed to go in the Crown Tundra? That shit is miserable. With how you have to scale mountains on the basis of where the game designers drew lines for you to go across. The only remedy for this movement is a bike with the most abhorrent turning circle known to man, and why do I have to buy upgrades to make it faster more frequently? When we already figured this out, like, oh, I don't know, go. Arceus, finally for the first time in 3D Pokemon, felt like a game considered with that space in mind. And the way it staggers its traversal upgrades means you can return back to past areas and re-explore them now that you have a new HM. An excellent way to bring back an old key tenet of Pokemon game design for this new system. But now we have a Scarlet Violet tier problem where the movement of this open world 3D Pokemon game has nothing to do with the emergent gameplay that it clearly wants to present. When on Braviary or Weirdia or Sneasler, you can't throw Pokeballs, interact with Pokemon in the same way you can normally, nor cycle into the stances or items or situations where you can without being dropped off a mile away from whatever you want to interact with. Weirdia especially should have allowed you to seamlessly cycle into the normal stance or throw in a ball or dodge rolling off of his back. Everything in Arceus is a half-second period where you're stuck doing nothing, and that seriously hurts the flow of the game. Stiffness that only persisted over to Koraidon and Scarlet and Violet, but there we don't even have any emergent gameplay to cycle into. Arceus also really revealed a sticky problem with modern 3D Pokemon and the lack of any sort of puzzle solving in the vein of the 2D games. A 1-2 punch dungeon design in particular. Discovery in the older games was almost always bookended by completing whatever task you happen to notice is in your path, and less so about finding secrets within the level design. There's a reason people remember the Braille and Ruby and Sapphire because it's the most overt example of the latter. But the simple remedy is that it doesn't always have to be cryptic for a hint of secrecy. The solution for ZA and onwards should be through proper use of the environment that is implicitly designed to house a puzzle, or a secret Pokemon, or an item that rewards clever use of moving the camera in a 3D space and actually spotting it at all, with the player's mobility and traversal options being paramount in obtaining whatever it is. Basically, is there something behind that waterfall, past that ledge? Can I walk on this geometry? How do I even get there? All questions that should be asked versus movable rock just equals use strength. This is a city, by the way. How do you integrate this type of level design and puzzle solving in a concrete jungle without it being repetitive? That is so hard on top of everything else this game is doing. The shit ain't Assassin's Creed where we got so much development time dedicated to hopping about rooftops. There's a whole underbelly of action RPG to work on. It's why games that do merge these concepts successfully with movement and level design are nowhere near as mechanically deep as Pokemon, nor have an interesting, context-driven world and take a more sandbox approach. I will say the DLC 2 of Scarlet and Violet actually have some perfect examples of how this works, but some what if I could actually go there areas that can only be accessed after the second round of credits. All it's missing is the cool movement factor. You know what is Kalos? Like, imagine for a second that we have some Pokemon-aided roller skates that allow you to zip around the city and cycle seamlessly into ride Pokemon to find rare guys and hidden items and tiny nooks and crannies throughout Lumiose. Yo Haruka, give me a Legends game with even a tenth of the movement of Bomber Cyberpunk. Like, it's right there, I will give you my firstborn child in return. Like, 3 years ago, I lambasted Scarlet and Violet's reveal for things that, surprise surprise, became the biggest problems for those games. And I can safely say that we're at a point where those concerns have handedly been answered word for word. We have that new director that has acknowledged the series' shortcomings more than ever before. We have them fully integrated in support studios as opposed to shitting out BDSPs, and we have games with the time taken to develop as feature complete. And even if this video ages like milk, given how close we are to the launch window, I did want to capture the impression I had before such an evolution of the series. And I have issues with this game. The ugly ass balconies, Pokemon still inverting their send out animation as opposed to having a new one for jumping out right, the caster friendly characters ballooning the narrative outside that of your own adventure, even if they're great and well designed, Pikachu by Dali, but this instead of the game falling apart is a monumental step forward in discourse that flat out would not have happened if the people that said to shut up and enjoy things, irrespective of that quality, had won out. And at least a lot of the people shitting on this series are uninformed anti-fans from outside the core fandom that lack the prior context. It's most of the bad faith agitators that should know better who try to determine vague, unquantifiable terms like effort, all to feed the media Ouroboros that exists to monetize the anger of people that don't know any better. Like, there's a balance, and regardless of whatever guy on either side of the coin that always tends to permeate fandom discourses saying no matter how much of a tourist they are, Game Freak are a damn sight closer to what the heights were in the DS with the most promising product they've made in years. No more doom, trepidation, outright ambivalence, you don't have to share that excitement. We are a long way from perfection. But I think people just have to acknowledge that this series is trying something new, and all it takes is a little context to see why.